Hello, Lucia, and thank you very much to be here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Lucia, your research focuses on the cognitive and behavioral characteristic of detection dogs, and in particular in relation to selection, training, affection, and performance. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your work, and also maybe your lab? What are the line of research that you are more interested about?
Sure. So my background is in animal behavior and cognition. My work focuses on cognition and behavior in detection dogs and all the factors that influence their development and training and performance and welfare from, across their whole lifespan and career. I was always interested in animal behavior and dogs especially, and I actually studied olfactory learning in rats in my master's and undergraduate studies, and so that's kind of how I got into working with detection dogs and then studying ways that we can better understand how dogs process odors and improve how we train dogs for olfactory tasks. And so my main areas of work right now are related to detection dog selection, training, performance, welfare, and all of the factors that influence any of those aspects.
You also have a dog, or just on the research?
I do have a dog who actually was one that failed from training as a detection dog, so he's home with me now.
Nice. Your research highlights that detection dog performance depends on many interacting factors, not just breed, so including biology, behavior, cognition, breeding, training, environment, also relationships. So could you explain to our audience which factors should be considered when identifying a promising detection dog?
Sure. So when it comes to breed, there's no single best breed for detection work because there's a lot of variability even within breeds. But that said, there are certain traits that are very important for this kind of work that are inherent in certain breeds that were bred for tasks that are very relevant for those kinds of roles. And so your sporting breeds, gun dog breeds, herding breeds, they tend to exhibit characteristics that are very compatible with the kind of work that they're being trained to do. And so having that foundation, they sort of, inherently possess some of those traits that other breeds might not be as likely to exhibit. That said, breeds or individual dogs from those breeds that we might expect those traits to be more common in aren't guaranteed to exhibit those traits. So breed is sort of seen as a foundation, but not everything. So breed and genetics, obviously very important, but so is the environment and experiences, especially early life environment, because it's very important in shaping behavior and can have a big impact on whether those breed-related or genetic traits are actually expressed. Training obviously is critical, but how trainable a dog will be and how much training will be needed will also depend on that dog's foundation in terms of their genetics and their experience. So I think all of these things are important sort of together. There's no single breed, no single component, whether it's genetics or environment, it's sort of all of it together.
Mm-hmm. And among these factors, which one is the one that you personally are more fascinating?
I think that the sort of behavioral genetics is very interesting because we still see a lot of wide variability, like I said, within a breed, but even within a litter of puppies that are related, there's still a lot of variation. And so that tells you that genetics are complex and there's probably a lot of influence of other factors. But I do think that genetics are important because having that foundation is very important for then building on, because you can have the perfect environment and, a great trainer, but if the dog sort of lacks that foundation to have those inherent characteristics, it can be more challenging to train the dog or not as enjoyable for the dog or for the trainer versus the dog that sort of has been bred to want to do that kind of work. But at the same time, on the flip side, you can have the proper sort of genetic profile or phenotype, but if that dog lacked the proper socialization or was exposed to bad training, then those genetics are not gonna, take it very far.
Yeah. And I know that you also have within your university like a breeding program. So same breed, the breed is always the same. You will tell our audience a little bit more about it. And when do you evaluate the dogs? Which kind of, for example, of test and characteristic do you look for?
Yeah, so we primarily breed Labrador retrievers. We have crossed in the German wire hair pointer at one point, and so we have some sort of mix, but mostly labs, and even our mixes are mostly lab with a little bit of that pointer mix. And so we perform evaluations across their whole first year of training, starting around 3 months, and then 5 months, 10 months, and then at the end of training around a year of age. And so we're looking for things like their motivation to search, motivation to interact with a reward, a toy, their engagement with their handler, and their sort of boldness, confidence in different environments.
Nice. So I remember I was at the joint symposium for working canines, and I also remember that in your symposium, within the symposium, in your workshop, you were really focusing also on like the motivation for the toy. Sometimes it may seem that a dog is really motivated, but how like it shows this motivation, and how also the stress levels, how it shows some kind of stress behaviors within this willingness to take the toy, or how it grabs the toy. So it's really very complex, and not just okay, the dog is interacting with a toy, so then it will be toy motivated, but it's really like also kind of the personality that is behind what the dog is doing that can make really the difference.
We try and look for those underlying characteristics that are more inherent and genetically based versus things that have been trained, because the more inherent a characteristic is, the stronger it's going to be and the more resilient. And so we look for dogs that, because a toy reinforcer reward is typically what's used to reinforce during training, that is a very important characteristic that will be valuable during when training becomes challenging, or in operational work when the dog needs to work for long periods or in difficult conditions. So versus a dog that's sort of just doing the task to get the reward because then it gets attention from the handler, or they've just sort of learned to do that, versus a dog that is really sort of just intrinsically driven to really want to chase and possess something, because it's sort of tapping into their kind of ancestral roots of sort of that predatory behavior. But like you said, it's not just their desire for the reward. Something we look at also is their level of arousal, because by trying to select too high for that sort of motivation and high energy, sometimes we end up with dogs that are very high arousal. And it's typically in a positive sense, in that it's because they're very excited to work and excited for their reward, and so that could be seen as a good thing. But if that arousal becomes too high, the dog can be really difficult to handle. It can just become overexcited. It can overheat easily. So we want sort of that middle ground of high motivation without that excessive arousal.
Yeah, nice. I think it's very important in all the aspects of working dogs, that sometimes we are just selecting for more and more and more. And then also from the welfare point of view, I mean, dogs are animals. They don't just work. They are not machines. So then they also need to be able to settle and to be physically and emotionally balanced also in their life when they are not working. And your research also highlights so you did some research about also the reinforcement, secondary reinforcement, and some handlers in the detection world are very against clicker, or they don't use clicker. What do you need? What would you say to them? How did you actually prove that secondary reinforcement could be very effective? And how is important that this is proved scientifically and not just something that, okay, a trainer does not suggest to use it and this is okay. However, there are studies that are done in a proper way that they show that maybe it's how you are using the clicker that is not working, because if everything is standardized and done in a proper way, the evidence are different.
Yeah, so that came from, obviously, clicker training has been very popular in the animal training world for a long time, and a lot of trainers know how effective it can be, but there has been some resistance or pushback, especially with working dogs, against using clickers. And I think that came from a sort of misconception or misunderstanding about how the clicker works, and the thought being that the reinforcer itself should be the most important thing, and that needs to be paired with the behavior or with the odor. And if you're using a signal or a bridge, then you're now weakening or diminishing that connection. But if paired correctly, the condition reinforcer, the point is that it sort of just represents that reinforcer to the dog, and they're still going to get the reinforcer. It's just bridging that point in time. And so obviously many trainers don't use clickers, and it's not necessary. You could still train dogs without it, but you can have a lot of problems when it comes to timing or just clarity of communication because of delays and other unintentional cues that the dogs pick up, to where a marker, a clicker, any kind of signal can signal to the dog very precisely in time exactly what it is that they performed, that they did that was correct, and signals that the reward is coming. And so it's a very simple study where one group of dogs was trained on a detection task, so to discriminate a target odor amongst distractors and perform their final response, which was sitting. And one group was trained in the sort of traditional non-clicker way, where when they would alert to the correct odor, the trainer would just throw the toy to them. The other group, when they alerted, the trainer would click and then they would get the toy. And we found that the dogs that were clicker trained progressed through the training steps faster. They were more accurate and precise in locating the odor. And that's probably because the clicker, again with the timing, the trainer's able to very quickly and precisely mark the dog's response, whereas if you're throwing a ball and having to wait, and there's long delays, the dog might start, looking around or backing up or looking at the handler, and then they're not clear on what exactly was correct. And so just generally made the training more efficient and also more resistant to extinction we saw when the dogs were not rewarded, because in some situations, especially in some operational environments, it can be impractical or not safe to be throwing a toy. And so the dogs that had been clicker trained, if they only received the clicker, which you typically wouldn't do this because you don't want the clicker to lose its value, but we did show that if you only presented the click for a few trials, it still maintained the dog's behavior at very high rates compared to the group that didn't get any feedback. And so that really shows that the clicker really acquired the reinforcing properties of the reward itself. And so that sort of belief that it's not as valuable and not as effective wasn't really the case, because it was just as potent of a reinforcer as the actual reward.
Nice. It's like clear communication and can also boost a little bit of resilience in the extinction of the behavior.
Exactly.
That's very, very, very interesting. Another topic that you work on is welfare. So what, for your point of view, should professionals consider in terms of stress, workload, motivation, and long-term well-being?
Welfare, obviously, I think is very important, because these dogs are doing very important jobs and we rely on them. And if a dog's welfare needs are not being met, or if they're, should be exceeding the minimum, that they're not going to be performing as well. And that's sort of the message I think that's important for operational handlers and trainers or organizations that employ working dogs, is that if the dog is not in an optimal state of welfare, it's not going to perform at its best. But that's also not the only reason we should care about welfare. Welfare is important in itself for the dog to be healthy and happy. But so yes, welfare is definitely important, but there's different ways to sort of think about how to think about or improve a working dog's welfare, because they're not the same as pets. So enrichment is important, but what enrichment looks like for a working dog might be different than what enrichment looks like for a pet. Working dogs tend to be very active, and so they just need to be engaged. They enjoy working, so really their work in a sense can be considered enriching. And we did do a study looking at typical declines in cognition as dogs age that is seen in pets compared to working dogs didn't exhibit those declines as they reached those older ages that the pets did. And so we don't know for sure because it was a survey study. We don't have cause and effect, but one explanation could be that engaging in training and in work that the dogs enjoy sort of protects against those declines over time, and so it is sort of having that enriching. But I think it's important to consider the work and the environment of the dog, and if the task is not enjoyable to the dog, or if training methods that are being used are not appropriate and are causing stress, or the housing conditions of the dog, all of those things can be stressful. And so we need to pay attention to all aspects of their work and also outside of work, and make sure that they do have off time to take breaks and to relax and sort of have work-life balance, just like humans need to have.
Yeah, true. Thank you very much. So Finally, what are the most exciting future direction in detection dog research and in your research? What are we going to expect?
I think what's most exciting is that the science is sort of catching up with an industry that has a very long history of practice and craft, and so the science can really validate a lot of things and support a lot of things that many trainers have known, but in some cases just lack the evidence or the support, but in some cases might also challenge misconceptions or ideas and lead to improvements in a lot of areas. And so I think the science can really improve how we train and select dogs and all aspects of their performance and welfare, just with validation or challenging things that actually are not effective. And I think we also just still don't fully understand how dogs perceive and process odors, because their noses are better than the best equipment and machines and technology that we have. And so we need the technology to catch up to the dogs. But I think that by combining things like genetics and chemistry and different technologies, we'll be able to sort of maximize the dog's potential.
Nice. So thank you very much, Lucia, for your time and for your work. And it was really nice to see you.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you too.